Next up, there has been no shortage of comments as we watch the horrific scenes playing out in Israel and Gaza, where several thousand Israelis and Palestinians have been killed in the last few weeks. Statements have poured in from pretty much every direction to comment on the Hamas attack and the war that's followed, including Amazon, American Eagle, the NFL, and even local fitness studios. Plenty of businesses have also taken heat for the way that they chose to acknowledge the violence. It raises a question. Did we really need to hear from them about this in the first place? And what kind of responsibilities do companies have when tragedy strikes halfway around the world? I'm joined by Sandy Lish, principal and co-founder of the Castle Group, and Kelly Chun, principal of Kelly Chun and Associates, a collaborative consultancy based here in Boston. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Crystal.
So, Sandy, I'll start with you. As we look at these companies figure out what to say, if to say something, and how their employees are reacting, I mean, what is the advice that you give folks that are under your purview?
Crystal, it is so complicated.
It is.
It's so subjective, and there's so many factors. So the first thing for anyone to think about is, why am I commenting? Is there a good reason? Is there something happening within my stakeholder group that drives me to have to? Is this just standard operating procedure and I always do? So by not commenting, it's an omission and it's expected? Or is it just because everyone's doing it? Or, chiming in and looking for attention? There's so many reasons. And so I think that is really where everybody must start. Why am I chiming in?
Yeah, Kelly,
Why?
Yeah.
Well, there are numerous reasons. I mean, we had this discussion at my classroom recently. I also teach at the BU College of Communication, and we were looking at some of the reasons why companies responded. One was purely logistical. Delta, for example, they wanted to make sure that their employees were safe, and they and other airlines were stopping flights between the United States and Tel Aviv, for safety. Other organizations wanted to reflect their values. Jamie Dimon, for example, Morgan Chase, he put out something where he unequivocally denounced the attack, but went further in acknowledging the history of the conflict and really advocating for peace in the region. So, different kinds of statements, some reflecting an organization's values and feeling the need to express them. Other companies having business, actually, in the Mideast, employees. One company, I can't remember the name of it, they've been doing business in Israel for 60 years. So they put out, an unequivocal statement, condemning the attack. So it runs the gamut, and it does start with the why, as Sandy noted.
Is there a concern that, Sandy, that employees will be upset that there wasn't a larger conversation? And then how do you handle that if an employee decides to post on their own social media and that kind of thing?
So, Crystal, we're seeing all sorts of things play out, just like that, and for those reasons, right? In every sense of the spectrum. And the kinds of conflagrations that are happening in different businesses, people losing jobs, people being doxxed, people, not feeling safe at work. All of those things are happening. I think what is important is to parse the difference between the statement that followed immediately following the attack. A terrorist attack by an organized terrorist group on innocent civilians. So Hamas terrorizing innocent Israeli, mostly Jewish civilians going about their everyday business. That, right, in the wake of that, seems pretty cut and dried. And I think, without getting into geopolitics, being able to denounce a terrorist attack on the face seems pretty safe. Where it becomes problematic is when organizations that really aren't in a position, like the fitness center that you referenced, but also many others, it's not their duty or responsibility to try to explain what is so complicated and so nuanced and so ancient. And we've seen many instances where, because folks did try to do that, they were left with a bigger mess than they had ever anticipated.
Yeah, and Kelly, I'm also thoughtful of like towns. Like I live in Arlington, and our Human Rights Commission put out a statement, and there was both praise and criticism for that. Like, where do you, at what point do you just say we're going to let the religious groups or the ethnic groups in that town sort of lead the conversation and sit back and sort of support whatever statement they put out? Do you think?
Well, some of the faith-based groups have come together in support. Others that are not in the faith community, the Boston City Council, for example, I think there was some drama there in discussing this particular issue, the latest chapter, in an ongoing drama with the City Council. But I think the faith-based community can be a calming force at a time that is so fraught and that is so emotional.
Yeah, definitely. We want to pull in a piece of data that we got. A 2023 Gallup Bentley University Force for Good report on if businesses should weigh in on current events. Now, the question was, should businesses take a public stance on current events? And 59% of young people, we're talking about 18 to 29, said yes. But then when you go a little bit higher up the age scale, age 60 and over, 43%. Sandy, I'll start with you. Does that surprise you, those numbers?
It doesn't surprise me. I'm in neither of those groups, but it does surprise me, and because the younger folks have been accustomed to this. This is what they've grown up with. When George Floyd was killed, everybody was issuing a statement and a letter. When January 6th happened, lots of statements. So they have come to expect it, and older workers have not come to expect it. And I think it's also the nuance of what is shared openly and discussed openly is very different amongst younger generations than in older generations. What is considered to be, you don't talk politics or money or what have you, or religion. The other thing, too, and I do love that Bentley study. I saw that this morning, too, and there's a lot of great data. That question is just such a blanket question. And so there's so much to dig into, and without, risking sounding like a broken record, when you're talking about communications, you have to really look at all the facts and all the context. There's not any one right or wrong way.
Because it's not just did you or should you respond, it's how you respond that matters, right?
Exactly.
How, when, why, to whom, is it internal, is it external? I mean, it just goes on and on.
A lot of different factors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do these numbers, which, as we see the breakdown of it, it seems like folks are really in the middle on the fence. I don't, 30 to 44, 51%. 45 to 59, 41%. It doesn't seem like anyone is 100% or really skewed toward yes or skewed toward no. People are sort of sitting in the middle.
Well, the younger demographic, as Sandy noted, that doesn't really surprise me because they're the ones who, for the most part, are out in the street demonstrating. Many of the colleges, for example, Boston University had a demonstration a few weeks ago out in front of Marsh Chapel. And there have been demonstrations in Copley Square, and all over. 100,000 people showed up on the streets of London. And a lot of those crowds are composed of young people who are used to demonstrating and talking about their feelings and just have a different level of comfort in talking about these controversial issues. The other data, I'm not so sure about.
Yeah, of course. And I'm curious, though, when we're talking about these groups of folks that, Sandy, as you mentioned, have expected a reaction or to just sort of play things out publicly anyway, then how do you balance if you are in a C-suite trying to really not be necessarily distracted by current events, keep things going in a certain way, or have other messaging that you're trying to put out right now?
That's an excellent question, right? Because right in the wake of when something catastrophic happens, communicators look inside and say, wait, we were going to be releasing this, or we have this story we were going to pitch to Crystal's team at GBH, and this isn't a good time to do that. So that's real. That's a real thing. You have to not be tone deaf. But I guess, in terms of when do you or, why do you, if you even decide to, it does go back to Is it expected? Do you have a reason, as Kelly said? You know, does this affect your business? Is there something happening because of this that's creating some sort of temperature within your institution? But I think, you know, the bottom line is stay in your lane, right? What is your lane? What is your reason? And what do you have to say about this? And don't try to bleed out into somebody else's lane, because that's when it really does become challenging.
And Kelly, you know, our team is looking at examples of this and prepping for the show, and saw that, you know, a lot of companies or organizations in an effort to try to respond to everyone is sort of conflating things like responding to Black Lives Matter or even after January 6th or AAPI issues and things like that. And it seems like they're like, well, we responded to BLM, we have to respond to what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And conflating those issues has its own challenges and you know, dangers, really.
Exactly. Again, you know, what Sandy had said about start with the why.
Yeah.
Think about your target audience, think about your messaging, and what are the consequences of your putting out a statement. You know, each one of these issues is its own, you know, has its own lane, so to speak, and companies need to look at it that way. You know, that was then, this is now, that was this particular issue, this is a very different kind of issue. And the messaging requires attention to the moment and to not what you might have done in an earlier scenario.
I'm going to put you both on the spot a little bit. Is there any organization that you all know of that is handling this well in terms of you know, their statement that they put out or their response or reaction or even their silence, you know, that kind of thing? Is there any place where you feel like is getting it right now in your opinions?
Well, I think that the article that you were quoted in PR Daily, where you talked about crisis communication specifically as it relates to the Middle East crisis, they pointed out the University of Arizona and the president who was responding to student activities on campus and having to not only condemn the terrorism act, you know, full stop, unequivocally, but also acknowledging the students' right to, you know, free speech and to free expression. You know, we may not agree with their advocacy, but they have every right, particularly on a college campus, to express their opinions. So making both statements very clear as to where the university stood, I thought they did a good job.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Sticking with higher ed, I think Tulane also did a fantastic job, very similar reasons. And I have learned that since then, I know there's a letter that's been signed by many institutional presidents, chancellors across the country that speaks with one voice. I thought that was excellent too, and that was organized, I think by Yeshiva University. But it's you know, bipartisan, non-secular, and there are presidents and chancellors from our region too that have signed it.